You're listening to IRN, the Inception Radio Network, Chicago, Illinois.
I'm ready to be told, time for secrets to unfold. It's our time to come of age, time for truth to turn the page. Don't wanna be inside the dark, but live within a question mark. Will be a friend or foe? Tell me now. You need to know. Need to know. You need to know.
Extraordinary Phenomena Investigations Council presents Epic Voyages. Come join us as we enter and experience the great mysteries of the world with tonight's host, James Clarkson.
You say too much to learn. You say cover up is fine. That's your plan, not mine. I'm ready to be told. Time for secrets to unfold. It's our time to come of age. Time for truth to turn the page. Don't wanna be inside the dark, but live within a question mark. Will be a friend or foe? Tell me now. You need to know. Need to know.
Howdy. Welcome to Epic Voyagers. I'm Jim Mars, your permanent floating, temporary, sometimes stand-in host. But tonight, boy, have we got a show for you. We're going to be talking about one of the most amazing UFO incidents in this nation's history. Unfortunately, it happened a long time ago. I'm not going to say what I was doing, but I was only about 9 years old at the time. And I will be real honest with you. I did not take much notice at that time. But today I think it is a very, very important case. But before we get into this, which of course, this case I'm talking about, of course, is UFOs over Washington, D.C. Now, it stands to reason if people from somewhere else are visiting the Earth, they would want to go to the centers of leadership. So, I've even had people ask me in recent years, well, why don't they go to Washington? Well, they did. And tonight we're going to discuss what happened, how, and why. And I'm going to have some special guests on. Number one is a former intelligence officer who is now retired. And he's going to tell us what he knows and his experience in the Washington area in 1952. And then next, we're going to have one of EPIC's own officers who also was a witness at the time. So stay tuned. This is going to be a good one. But first, let's go back and talk about the background of this story. The reality of UFOs, at least to the population of Washington, D.C., became pretty undeniable on the evening of July the 19th, 1952, when more than 8 objects were tracked on radar at both Andrews Air Force Base and Washington National Airport. They were cruising along at speeds of 100 to 130 miles an hour, but would then accelerate to fantastically high speeds. These objects were observed by experienced pilots, air traffic controllers, tracked by radar, and seen by thousands of people for several hours. And the thing to keep in mind is these objects, whatever they were well within Washington's most restricted airspace. They passed over both the Capitol and the White House. And over the next several days, they kept coming back. And this, of course, was simply the latest in a whole spate of UFO sightings actually around the world. Of course, as we all know, that really got kick-started in June of 1947 when some UFOs were spotted over Mount Rainier. But when the sightings over Washington first began, the news media was right on top of it. News reporters and photographers pressed into the radar room at National Airport and were watching these objects zooming all around. However, before too long, the media was ordered out. The explanation was that, they might learn classified radio frequencies and procedures that were being used to vector the fighters against the UFOs. Captain Edward J. Ruppelt, who was involved in this and later would become the head of one of the first official UFO investigations, Project Grudge, said, quote, "I knew this explanation was absurd because any ham radio operator worth his salt could build equipment and listen in on any intercept." He later said that the real reason for dismissing the media was to prevent them from learning the reality of the UFOs should one be brought down. F-94 military jets were sent aloft to intercept these bogies, which were flying through this restricted airspace. But every time the jets would close in, the UFOs would accelerate, boom, be out of sight. Radar positions were given, but the ground observers couldn't seem to see anything. It was all very frustrating. The news media went wild. Headlines said, "Fiery objects outrun jets over the Capitol. Investigation veiled in secrecy following vain chase. And jets alerted for saucers. Interceptors chase lights in the DC skies." That was back when newspapers still had some control and were not under the total dominance of their corporate masters. So the next day, or after several days, on July the 29th, Major General John Samford called a news conference trying to respond to this hoorah. It was the largest and longest press conference convened by the Air Force since World War II. According to Ruppelt, General Samford hedged on some questions simply because he didn't have an answer. And he finally passed the buck to an intelligence officer who speculated that all of the stuff over Washington was actually caused by temperature inversions. Now, this is a phenomenon that creates pockets of warm air unable to rise due to similar temperature layers in the sky. And temperature inversions sometimes can reflect light and might even be picked up on radar. So, of course, the news media duly reported that Air Force debunked saucers as just natural phenomenon. However, the Civilian Aeronautics Authority, the CAA, which is a forerunner of our current Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, conducted a study. And they, too, concluded that temperature inversion had been indicated in almost every instance of the Washington sightings. But this was, of course, warmly embraced by all the debunkers, especially since so many of them had been spotted. 50 targets alone were tracked on May the 23rd, which even preceded July. But, however, it has since been determined that during those nights in June, July, and August, the radar images had only appeared on a few nights, and that the temperature was not such as to create temperature inversions. So eventually, of course, not made clear to the public, the Washington National Airport sightings remained as unknowns. It's really amazing what has happened since then because, of course, we've had all of the policies changing For example, this will blow you away. This, I think, may be evidence of an actual shooting war between UFOs and the military. According to the New York Times, between 1951 and 1956, 192 aircraft either vanished or were crashed and destroyed. In June and July of 1952, the period we're talking about, 94 fighter jets worldwide either disappeared or crashed, and 51 men were confirmed killed. Now, of course, since they vanished and since they crashed, then you can't always say they were shot down by UFOs. But what would provoke something like that? Well, the news media reported in 1952, quote, the Air Force today revealed that jet pilots had been placed on 24-hour nationwide alert against flying saucers with orders to shoot them down if they refused to land. By July the 30th, Major General Roger Ramey, Deputy Chief of the Air Force Staff of Operations, that name may sound familiar to you. He was the one who met with reporters in Carswell Air Force Base in Fort Worth, Texas, a few days after whatever crashed in Roswell, and tried to explain it away as a weather balloon, even though he was holding a telegram in his hand that modern computer enhancement is shown to contain words like crash, victims, etc. But he also, at that time, in 1952, tried to explain that, yes, he admitted that interceptor planes had been sent aloft several hundred times as the result of reported sightings of UFOs, but he stressed that this was just standard procedure. And then, of course, between 1951 and 1952, we had all these crashes and planes vanishing. Then, of course, the military apparently got cooler heads and said, okay, never mind. And they ordered, do not shoot them down. The instructions were changed. They became known as the Communication Instructions for Reporting Vital Intelligence Sightings or Service. And the orders directed pilots to report UFOs, but keep the reports secret under penalties contained in the Communications Act of 1934 and espionage laws. So, and before too long, this censorship and secrecy extended well beyond the military. You see, prior to about this time, about 1952, 53, 54, airline pilots were routinely reporting sightings of UFOs. But the procedure at that time was for them to come back, land, and report to their respective companies, which, of course, really didn't have any means of doing much about it, but at least the reports were there for the public to see. But on February the 17th, 1954, the Air Force officials met with representatives of the major airlines, and at that time, Scripps Howard News Service was reporting that commercial pilots had been citing between 5 and 10 UFO sightings per night prior to this meeting. And the Air Force said, well, they wanted to get the reports in the quickest way, so that they began to take the government military orders known as Joint Army Navy Air Force Publication 146, or JANAP, and they applied the JANAP rules then to the commercial airlines. The commercial pilots now were not to report directly to their employers, but instead to send reports to the Military Air Transport Service, or MATS, intelligence in Washington, or to the nearest Air Force base. And they were also asked not to discuss their sightings publicly or give them to the newspapers. This prompted one pilot to say, this Air Force policy is a lesson in lying and creed, the big brother attitude carried to the ultimate extreme. Despite the fact that nearly 500 airline pilots signed a petition protesting the JANAP policy, it was still carried through. Someone with a great deal of power was determined to close off public discussions of UFOs. So, back to Washington. What really happened? Was it just temperature aversion? Well, I'm hoping that we have Colonel Paul on the line. Colonel Paul has asked that we not give out his last name because he still has concerns. He worked in intelligence for years, and of course, you learn very quickly you're not supposed to talk. But at this point, he's now 84 years old and has determined that he thinks the public has the right to know about UFOs and the existence of extraterrestrial life. This is Jim Mars talking to you, Colonel Paul, and I've been asked, we're not going to mention your last name, but can you briefly tell us your background in the U.S. military?
I was in military. I was in intelligence in Washington as a civilian. After I graduated from the University of Maryland, and I was in for about 9 years, and then I went to another job in the same building that I was in then, and was a communications specialist.
I see. And I understand that in July of 1952, you were in Silver Springs, Maryland. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Well, what happened to you in Silver Springs then, Paul?
Well, I noticed, I went outside of my residence, and not my parents' residence, and noticed that there were 9 shining objects in a V formation going due north over the middle of the D.C. area into Maryland, and estimated that they were about 20 miles high. That was higher than any airplane we had at that time.
Mm.
They continued for about 15 minutes until they were out of sight, and they disappeared as a point of one point of light. Of course, that was at a very large distance.
Mm-hmm.
They had traveled to the point that I couldn't find them anymore.
Did they stay in formation, or did one or more?
They stayed in formation, except for there was a V-shaped formation pointing towards the north, and they were
and north would have been right towards Washington, right?
No, towards the other way. They had finished going over Washington.
Oh, they had been to Washington and then passing over your position. Okay.
That's right. And then, let's see. Then I noticed that they were under a tremendous size invisible dish, which was about 1,000 feet in diameter.
Wow.
In other words, and I have a sketch here that I'm looking at right now.
Mm-hmm. I believe to you, this disc did not appear to be a solid object.
No, it did not. You could see right through it. But I figured that they were protecting that one big disc was either the other discs belonged to it, or they were protecting it.
I don't suppose in 1952 that too many people were thinking in terms of a energy force field, but Would that be a accurate description of what you think that might have been?
Yes, I've concluded the same thing.
Uh-huh. How long did these objects remain in sight?
For about 10 minutes.
So they were moving relatively slowly?
That's right. But at that
Did you
height,
ever see it?
At that height, that is not real slow.
No.
But angularly, it was.
Could you offer an estimation at what speeds they were traveling?
Well, no, I hadn't figured that out.
Okay.
But for 10 minutes, they were over at least New York or New Jersey.
Well, that's really moving on. Did you ever, at any time, did you see any of our jet interceptors?
Have I seen a jet interception?
Did you see at that time any of our interceptors?
I did not.
Okay. Did you try to contact and tell anyone in authority about what you'd seen?
I called the Air Force in the Pentagon, and they just shrugged their shoulders and laughed me off. Didn't tell them my background or anything.
So they just thought you were just a civilian calling in?
Mm-hmm.
And I guess they treated you like they did anyone else. They just blew you off, right?
Got the same old.
Same old. Well, I understand, though, at some point you talked to a news reporter by telephone, and there may have been even someone else on the phone.
Well, that was probably a 1950.
64? Was that the other incident?
Or 64 or 5, yeah.
Okay, so you had another experience. Well, let's move up then to 1964, which, of course, was the year that Lyndon Johnson was president. And
that was the one that raised a lot of stink.
All right, well, tell us about that.
Well, I was in my office, and at 4:20, we have to close the windows and lock them for security. And I was on the east side of the wing and of that building, and I noticed about 12 to 15 objects traveling in a north to south direction, and they were being pursued by 2 jets.
So that's where the jet interceptors came in, was this sighting you had in 1964.
Right.
Okay.
Or 65.
So what happened when the jets, did they ever catch up with the objects?
Well, they did, but after much huffing and puffing, believe me, and bellowing, you know, when a jet has got all the cocks open in the fuel, and it just is a black streak, you know, those old jets.
So they were pouring on the coal. They were giving it everything they had.
Everything they had, and they finally caught up to them. And what happened was astounding to me. As soon as they reached a point where the other people didn't want to be bothered with them any longer, They took off.
Meaning the UFOs.
Huh?
Yeah, meaning the people in the UFOs or whatever the options were. Yeah.
They, at that point, somebody pushed a button and they went so fast it looked like the jets had stopped. Have you ever seen that?
No, not midair.
In midair. That's at a speed, this is what astounded me, at a speed that was incomprehensible just about for me to be watching. And then all of a sudden that stopped. My goodness. I couldn't believe it.
So they took off at such a speed, it made the jet fighters that were going full bore look like they were just sitting still.
That's right. That was the impression I got to my eye. That's right. And that's all I can report on.
Did you try to report that incident?
Oh, yes, several times. I went down. I was invited to the TV station, and I got down there not the same day, but several days later, and they absolutely did not want me to mention any other aircraft in the sky. And
they didn't want you. Yeah, they didn't want you to talk about the jet fighters, right?
That's right. They're stopping, so to my eye. That's exactly right.
Wow. Is this when you were talking to a news reporter and I had called up to the office. They had invited me down there and was greeted, I don't know who it was now, but by a male. And he informed me that I would only be invited to talk about the UFOs if I did not mention anything about jets or U.S. air jets. Now, this was coming from a media producer, right? Not from the military.
No, that was the media producer, and I said, "Are you sure?" And I says, "I'm going home if you don't want me to tell what the whole story is." And he called the other guy on the phone, whoever it is. He told me the other guy I did not speak to, he did, and he said he won't get in. He doesn't want you to mention the jets. So I left. I felt like I had been put upon and was being asked to put the public on about the whole thing, and I resented it.
Well, good for you. We need more plain, straight-talking people like you. Well, listen, in both these instances, and particularly the one in 1952 when you saw the formation coming out of the Washington, D.C. area, was there any reason at all for you to even consider that this might be some kind of a natural weather phenomenon?
Well, I had never seen anything like that. In my business, I was studying those things all the time.
Oh, you were studying UFOs?
There were reports in and out, you know what I mean, included before they cleaned up everything.
So, what did you have any orders from your superiors how to handle such reports?
I did not. In fact, he didn't even know anything about it. And my superior did, I'm sure, knew nothing about UFOs at that time. Neither did I.
Well, in light of today and after your years of experience, what are your thoughts today? Do you have any? What is your idea? What do you think these things were?
Well, I have since come to the conclusion that they are extraterrestrial. They're in our skies all the time, at will. They're not from one area, they're from many areas. Mm-hmm. And it appears as though there are, Eisenhower had 2 visits and flew out to make contact with them. It's on record. Mm-hmm. Anybody can look it up. And the first group that he met offered him a cure for all, as I would say it, a cure for diseases.
Whoa.
And the second group, not at the same time, but within a certain short time, offered him military benefits and etc. These were the Greys. I never have found out really who the other group was.
Now, did you learn this through study, or did you hear this from people within?
I've read books about it.
Mm-hmm. I see. But in 1952, you actually saw them with your own eyes.
Yes.
Okay. And, of course, the official explanation at that time was that it was just temperature inversion, different inversions of temperatures causing lights to reflect down. That does not jive with what you saw, does it?
Absolutely not. I am blessed, or I was blessed, with 2010 vision and know what I see.
Exactly. You know what you see. All right, Colonel Paul, thank you so much for joining me tonight, and thank you for sharing your story with our audience. I'm sure they find that very, very interesting and very, very revealing. And, of course, it fits in perfectly with many other accounts from that period of time. Is there anything you'd like to add before we go to a break here?
I would like to see the U.S. come clean and say, hey, we tried to handle this, but there is no answer to it. Here's what it is.
Right. Do you, in your mind, is there any reason to believe that these ETs are hostile?
I've never had. I have other not contact, but indications of non-hostility by them.
Okay. All right. So in other words, we just get a visit from the neighbors, and our first response was to order military jets to shoot them down. They later rescinded that, of course, but I guess that kind of paints a picture of where we are. Yep. We're not very good neighbors, are we?
Not very good neighbors, no. Come clean, start all over.
There we go. I'm with you. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Okay. That was an 84-year-old retired intelligence analyst who worked in the D.C. area and had served the intelligence community for more than 30 years. And now he has decided that it's time to try to alert people to the reality of what's going on. And, of course, here speaking to an epic audience, he's probably could be accused of preaching to the choir. But to carry this on forward is going to require the rest of us doing our part. The accounts of UFOs just continued to go on and on. Following the events in Washington back in 1952, even some of the official investigations regarding UFOs were calling for an end to the official secrecy. As early as April 1952, Navy Secretary Dan Kimball had his own UFO experience while flying to Hawaii. He said that two dish-shaped crafts flying at speeds estimated more than 1,500 miles an hour, which, believe me, folks, was impossible for jets of that era, zoomed and circled his executive plane and another plane carrying Admiral Arthur Radford. Upon landing, Kimball radioed the Air Force with a report of what he had seen, and sometime later he was outraged to learn that not only had the Air Force apparently not seriously investigated his case, but would not even release to him what analysis they did prepare. And this is the Secretary of the Navy. And so he ordered the Navy to begin its own investigation, and part of that resulted in a very famous incident also in 1952 when a chief warrant officer named Delbert Newhouse was in Utah, just north of Salt Lake City, and they saw a group of 12 to 14 bright, shiny objects maneuvering in formation at high speed, and he, being a Navy photographer for 21 years, grabbed his film camera, set the turret at the 3-inch telephoto lens, and exposed about 40 feet of film before these objects flew out of sight. This time the film went not to the Air Force, but to the Navy Photo Interpretation Laboratory near Washington. And the analysts there quickly ruled out aircraft, balloons, birds, and their final conclusion was unknown objects under intelligent control. One of the best and most well-documented of the early UFO accounts. Well, we're coming up to the midpoint here, and I think it's about time that we take a break, and we'll consider Paul's story, and then coming back with any luck, we're going to hear from another eyewitness of the 1952 UFOs over Washington. And I'm warning everyone, we've got here in Texas some thunderstorm activity coming in with lightning and thunder. And so if for some reason I'm gone away, I have not been abducted, probably. I have probably been the victim of an electrical outage due to thunderstorms, but let's keep our fingers crossed, and hopefully that's not going to happen. And I want all of you to, if you have people interested in UFOs, why don't you, here's an opportunity while we take a break to call them, send them an email, Twitter them, whatever, and let them know that we've got some very outstanding material that we're presenting tonight on some of these early UFO incidents in U.S. history, and encourage them to come listen in. So we will be back right after these messages.
Hi, everybody. This is Bill.
And Nancy.
And we're on Future Theater Radio live Saturday on the Inception Radio Network. Yay!
EPIC is Extraordinary Phenomena Investigations Council, the forum for scholars, experts, and those fascinated by and involved in the study of ancient civilizations, conspiracies, cryptozoology, ETs, and UFOs, fringe science, the paranormal, shamanism, and all manner of extraordinary phenomena. Please join EPIC as we examine the mysteries of the world and beyond on epicvoyagers.com. And for updates on upcoming interactive video presentations, the latest news and discussion on the EPIC Forum, as well as research, investigations, and membership opportunities, plus the EPIC Voyagers program schedule, all on the Inception Radio Network. Thank you for joining us.
Écoutez Form Radio tous les dimanches à 21h Eastern, uniquement sur Inception Radio Network.
Hello, I'm Pat Uskert, inviting you to tune in to Epic Voyages every Monday evening at 8 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Eastern, right here on Inception Radio Network. To find out more about EPIC and how you can become a member, visit epicvoyagers.com.
Howdy! Here we are on Epic Voyages again. Epic Voyagers. We're all Voyagers in this epic adventure. And for those of you who may not be that familiar with EPIC, that stands for the Extraordinary Phenomena Investigations Council. Whoa, I guess that makes us all council members now. Well, last segment, we talked with the 84-year-old intelligence analyst, Paul, and I apologize. I think I start off calling him Colonel Paul, and you'll find out why my mix-up on this section, because now we're going to go to Vivian Walker, who is a newly named State Director for EPIC for the state of Louisiana and a senior investigator. And Vivian, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
It's my pleasure to be here.
I know you've had some experience in this field before because you previously worked for another UFO investigation unit organization, correct?
Yeah, I was the state director for them.
Okay, so you're not just jumping into this as a babe in the woods, as they say.
No.
Well,
no, I'm not.
Well, obviously, if you were a witness to the 1952 events over Washington, D.C., let's just go all the way back to there. And according to my notes here, you were living on 63rd Avenue, which is a street running north and south in Cheverly, Maryland?
Cheverly.
Cheverly, as in Chevrolet,
yes.
But it's Cheverly. Yeah,
Cheverly,
Maryland. And that's 7 miles northeast of D.C., right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's just start from there. You were a young girl, but you were not a babe in arms.
No.
You certainly knew what was going on in the environment around you. So let's go to that evening on July the 26th. And according to all the reports, and you got it right, you said you believed it was about 6 or 7 o'clock, and I think 6 p.m. is pretty much what they've nailed. Tell us your
I knew it was around that time only because I had to put it into the same time frame with when we went to bed, and we were always sent to bed rather early because, in the summer I remember looking out the window and the kids would be playing outside and we were already in our beds. So I knew it was, early in the evening.
Yeah, it sounded like you had some strict parents like I did.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, folks, at this time there really wasn't any television. And so really, when we started getting sundown, it was about time to go to bed.
Actually, we had TV.
You did? Well,
yeah.
you were ahead of us here in Texas.
Yeah.
Okay, so it was about bedtime, but you weren't in bed, were you?
No.
Okay.
I wasn't even in my pajamas. It was one of those rare times that we were allowed to be outside, after dinner, and normally right after dinner we would have taken a bath and then gone to bed shortly afterwards.
That would have been during school days, right? This is the summer.
This was any time. Any time.
Anytime. Okay.
Right. At that point, I was the oldest of 5 children. My parents later had another one, so I'm the oldest of 6. But when you've got 5 kids, you want to get them to bed early. So I think that was the thinking behind that. But I'm not real sure why we were allowed to stay up a little bit later. And why we weren't already up in the bathtub. But we were outside. The entire neighborhood was out there, and we were all looking down the street or up the street. To me it seemed like it was down the street because there was a hill down at the end. But we were, the whole neighborhood was out looking at these UFOs that were flying around up there, and there were about 7 of them. And as near as I can recall, I just remember seeing them kind of flying initially in a group, and then there were 2 of them that kind of moved off a little bit, and then back in again. And it was just, I didn't really fully comprehend why everybody was afraid, and everybody was so concerned about it. And then my father, who was extremely concerned, he went inside the house. He had just made lieutenant colonel 5 days prior to this incident, and he was stationed at Andrews Air Force Base, and he was also working out of the Pentagon. And he went in the house to call the Pentagon, and when he came out, he was just stone-faced. I mean, I can still see the look on his face. And I remember thinking that it had to be top secret because I knew he had, top secret security clearance. Wow. And I just assumed it was something top secret, and that's why he wouldn't talk to anybody about it. And so, the event didn't last that long for me because we were eventually, sent inside the house to take a bath and go to bed.
Were the objects still in the sky when you were sitting into the house, or had they gone home?
As I recall, everybody was still out there looking at them when I was sent in the house. And
okay. Can you describe what you saw? I mean, was it like
they were silver disc? They were silver disc, and you could see the sunlight reflecting off of them.
Solid objects.
Yeah.
Okay. And they were coming, I believe here in the notes said they were coming in a southwesterly direction. So
yeah.
Probably like Paul, before you, they had already passed over Washington and were heading away from Washington, correct?
I'm not really sure. I'm kind of, after all these years, I'm a little turned around on the direction. But
you said Cheverly. You said Cheverly was northeast of Washington, and so in your notes they say they were flying southwesterly, which would have been away from Washington, right?
Right.
Okay, probably, maybe. We'll give that a definite maybe. Hey, a little water has gone under the bridge since 1952, hasn't it, Vivian?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, now, so that actually was your experience. Was there ever any your thought then or now that maybe it was some sort of natural phenomena?
No. And one of the things that about, somewhere between 15 and 20 years ago, I was here visiting my dad, and I was living in California at the time. And we were sitting at his kitchen table, and we were talking about UFOs and stuff. And I said, well, what was the whole deal when you went in and called the Pentagon in 1952 when, they were flying over? And he started laughing, and he said the reason that he was so stone-faced when he came back out is because he was just livid. Because when he went in and called the Pentagon, they treated him like a nut job. Now, you have to keep in mind that my dad was an experienced World War II pilot. He was also the first pilot to fly into Orly, France after D-Day. He flew General Lee in to meet with General de Gaulle. And, so he was no dummy when it came to aeronautics. And so he was so infuriated by the fact that they treated him like a nut job that's why he wouldn't talk to anybody about it. It had nothing to do with anything being top secret.
Wow. So, in other words, he got the same brush off that earlier Paul said he did when, as an experienced intelligence analyst, he tried to tell him what was going on. And of course, I do understand that at the time, the switchboards, the newspapers, the police were just inundated with calls from people, you know, saying, here's what I saw, or what is it, right?
Yeah. I think, you know, back then a lot of people were really scared, you know. I think it was too soon after War of the Worlds. I think people thought we were being invaded, and, you know, so that's understandable why at that time people were doing that.
That's a very good point, Vivian, because, you know, today, Orson Welles' War of the Worlds, you know, that sounds like ancient history, but in 1952, that was less than 15 years after. That was like, you know, like somebody talking about 9/11 now. You know, it was still very fresh in a lot of people's minds.
Well, and there, you know, there were a lot of people that caused so much panic. There were people that committed suicide even. And there were people that, you know, took guns and stuff and went off into the hills to hide out. And, you know, people thought it was real. You know, they thought all this was real. And so, you know, it was, and this was when, in the late 40s when Orson Welles did that?
No, actually about 1938.
Oh, I was thinking it was in the 40s. But anyway, it was...
But still, see, that would have been like 13, 14 years.
Yeah, so people were still, you know, in that panic mode. And you could see that... just by looking at the people up and down my street, you know, if you look at that street now, I've gone to V Pike and looked at it, and there's big trees on it in everybody's front yard. Well, when we lived there, there were no trees at all in anybody's yard. We had woods behind us, but we had a very clear view of what was going on.
Right, right. Well, another thing I might add here is that 1952 was only 7 years after World War II ended. And the nation was still very much in a war security mind frame, you know.
Oh, yeah, we used to have drills where we'd have to, you know, get under the desk, and, you know, they'd have the alarms go off, and everybody in the school would have to get under the desk. They were, you know, in case somebody was going to come bomb us. And so, you know, people were still in that mindset.
We did that also in Texas, and of course, let me remind the younger listeners, this was right after, several years after Winston Churchill had declared an Iron Curtain in Europe, and we were already being conditioned to be fearful of the Russian communists in World War III. And of course, the Cold War went on for a good number of years, and this was the beginning of it. But this was also the beginning of the McCarthy era. You know, paranoia runs deep, and you have to put that into the context of what was going on at that time. Since then, Vivian, I know you've studied the phenomena, and you've gone out as an investigator for now at least two UFO investigation organizations, and I'm sure that you've seen the arguments that what everyone saw over Washington was actually just lights reflected off of temperature inversions, just different levels of the atmosphere.
Oh, that's such baloney.
Yeah, absolutely, because, you know, I think it was only, maybe it was a year before that, the Lubbock Lights that took place in 1951, about a year earlier. I went out there to work on the newspaper at the Lubbock Avalanche Journal back in the mid-'60s, and one of the old photographers there had been a photographer for the Lubbock newspaper in the early 1950s. In fact, had taken pictures of what became known as the Lubbock Lights, which was a series of glowing objects in a V-shaped formation that passed slowly over the town of Lubbock, Texas, way out in West Texas. And I remember asking him one time, I said, well, you know, the government said it was just street lights shining off the underside of a flight of plovers, which is a kind of duck. And he said, yeah, they said it was duck butts. Right. You know, he never bought that, and he actually saw them and took photographs of them. So they really handed us a bunch of dissembling disinformation over the years, haven't they, Vivian?
They really have, and it's really insulting to people's intelligence, you know, to for the government to come off with these ridiculous stories. You know, some of us have seen things that we know for a fact are real, that we've seen up close and personal. And for anybody to say that it's anything else is just ludicrous.
Well, we have the documents now showing that starting back at the very time we're talking about 1951, 52, 53, that a policy was actually officially instigated of denial and ridicule. Mm-hmm. They said you didn't see anything. If you keep insisting you did, then you might need psychiatric treatment. Well, you know, that's just unconscionable, because not only is it so contrary to the truth, but wouldn't you agree that that's probably caused a lot of psychological damage to a lot of people and maybe even broken up families?
Oh, I agree. I've talked to a number of people over the years that, you know, have actually had that happen. You know, I, of course, can't say names, but I do know of one person a couple of years ago that because of her involvement in this, it caused a divorce. And I've heard of other people over the years as well that have had the same kind of problem, and I think it's really sad that our government doesn't come forward and say, yeah, this is a real thing. And I realize the reason they don't do it is because they don't want to admit they have no control of the airspace.
Yeah, that's a very real problem, because if you'll think about it, the only real rationale for having any kind of real structured government in the first place is one of the two obligations, responsibilities given to government in our Constitution. One, of course, is to coin and regulate money and tariffs. The other is to provide for the common defense. Okay? Mm-hmm. A defense, to provide for defense. Well, you can see that if they were forced to come out and say, well, there's things flying over our most restricted airspace, and we're not only sure of who they are, but we can't do anything about it, then, you know, everyone would be saying, well, then why am I paying taxes? Right?
Yeah, really.
That's it. Well, listen, I understand that your dad, did he retire as a full colonel?
Yes. He had another experience, too, when he was flying a mission over Laos. Tell us about that. That was in 1967, and he was flying a mission over Laos for about 25,000 feet, and he was flying a C-130, and they were flying parallel to the equator, and they'd go so many miles and then turn and stay parallel to the equator and fly back. And he didn't go into detail about what the mission was, just that they were going along, and it was a perfectly clear day. And all of a sudden, this craft came from out of nowhere and in a head-on collision course with his plane. And at the last moment, it went underneath his plane. And for some reason, I didn't think until after his death that I should have asked him if it caused any kind of turbulence or what. But he said that it just, you know, to quote him, he said it scared the hell out of him. Did
he ever give you a description?
He did better than that. He did a drawing for me of the craft, and he wrote down, you know, what had happened and how he was flying, and, you know, et cetera.
Well, and since we can't see the drawing, can you describe it?
Well, it was shaped like the hull of a boat, and this craft he saw no windows on it at all, and there wasn't anything distinguishable about it other than it was silver. And the interesting thing is that at some other point, I had been researching some stuff on the internet, this is years ago, and I came across a craft that somebody had drawn and put on the internet that looked very much like the one that he had drawn for me. And so I thought, I don't know where that person got that drawing or anything. I mean, for all I know, it could have been the co-pilot that was with him, because they decided not to report it. They had kind of talked about it for a minute, and then decided they decided not to report it because it would have gone into their ERs and affected their ability to get promoted.
Right, and or another possibility is it was just the same model UFO.
Right.
Right? Somebody saw a similar object.
Yeah, I thought of that too. But he and I used to have quite a few discussions about it, because he was convinced that they came from other dimensions or through dimensions because of the fact that this thing literally came from out of nowhere.
They didn't see it coming up. Well, when you said it went under their plane, did he give you any indication of whether this was they were just following, the UFO was following a flight path, or did it change course?
No, it changed course and went underneath his plane to avoid the collision.
Well, then that indicates intelligent direction.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, that's what it kind of was.
Yeah, it was because it was coming in a head-on collision course when it came from out of nowhere, and then just dove under the plane at the last moment.
What do you say when you ask him if he'd been debriefed about what happened when he got on the ground?
He said he wasn't, because they didn't report it. They knew if they reported it, that they'd never get a rank again. They'd never get promoted again. You know, it was,
right.
You know, they kind of talked about it for a minute, and then they decided now they weren't going to say a word because it would have gone in the ERs.
You know, Vivian, that's still going on.
I know.
I heard a story from some pilots, and they radioed the ATC, the air traffic controller, and said, you know, I've got a UFO over here on my right wing, and it's very huge, and it's silver, and it's pacing us. And the pilot was just all excited, and the ATC radioed back and said, "Are you reporting a UFO?" And there was a long silence, and the pilot said, "No."
Yeah, that's very common.
So they
unfortunately.
Unfortunately. And that's why that the man in the street is still, you know, being titillated on the one hand with ETs and spaceships and, you know, the USS Enterprise and everything else on TV. And yet when it comes to the news, it's like, nothing there, folks.
Yeah, it's very frustrating, you know, and especially when people get really good photographs or video or anything, they do everything they can to discredit it, and it's just really unfortunate. Well,
the only bright spot is that, at least to me, this is changing. I know when the sightings over Stephenville occurred here a couple of years ago here in Texas, certainly the Texas media, and I think to a pretty good extent the national media, actually began reporting on that in a fairly straightforward reportorial style, rather than just sneering and laughing and say, "Oh, well, look what the hicks in Texas are saying," right? You remember that?
Yeah.
Would you agree that the attitude is changing?
I think it's changed a little bit, and but I've also seen in the last several years too, I've seen where, you know, something will be reported and the local news media, as they're reporting it, they'll snicker and make jokes about it, you know. They don't really treat it all that seriously, and I think that kind of contributes to the overall problem. Nobody wants to be humiliated or made a fool of, and unfortunately that's what's been going on for a long time.
Well, and that's probably caused you problems in your investigations, because how many people have said, well, I'll tell you what I saw, but don't use my name. Or they'll say, no, I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to be laughed at, or nobody will believe me. I'm sure you've heard all of that.
Well, not only have I heard all that, but I was there at one time myself. If I even brought the subject up, I'd have people say to me, well, what are you smoking? You know, or they'll say,
right.
I've also had them say, whatever you're drinking, I'll have the same thing.
Yeah,
you know, they make jokes out of it, and so you get to where you don't want to talk about it.
Exactly.
And it was like that for a lot of years for me, and I wouldn't talk about my own experiences. I wouldn't talk about any of it, and you know, I've got fabulous photographs I've taken, and I keep negatives. I keep original disc, you know, of certain ones, because I don't want anybody ever saying I, you know, played with something in Photoshop and did this or did that. So I think it's really important for people to know that if they do get something, to keep originals and to document everything. I think documenting is very important too.
everyone listening, write down this number. Here's a call-in number. I'm sure that the chat room is just bursting with questions. We've got some technical difficulties here. I'm trying to get some of these questions passed along. But in the meantime, write down 888-919-2355. There's a call-in number. And maybe we can get you on. We've got, just less than 20 minutes to go, but especially with Vivian Walker here, an experienced UFO investigator, and now the state director for EPIC in Louisiana, and myself, who's been kicking around looking at UFOs since early 50s, mid-50s. Then I can prove it because I when I was about 14 years old, I did a watercolor painting of a UFO landing on a Texas highway. It was based on newspaper accounts of an incident they had out in Levelland, Texas, way back in the 50s. So I've been at it a while too. So you've got two experienced people here with UFOs and attendant things. So if you've got a question, call 888-919-2355. That's 888-919-2355. Hope to get some calls in. Meanwhile, Vivian, tell me, what have you got coming up? Have you got any good cases that you're getting ready to look into, or are you just waiting with your bags packed for something?
No, actually, I've been investigating a case that is extremely interesting. It's probably the most interesting one I've ever been associated with. And the person involved had filmed an entity some time back that was in her backyard, and it was also witnessed by some of her children. And when she finally had the presence of mind to get the camera and take a movie of it. She had about 40 minutes had elapsed, and she filmed this entity, and it appeared to be injured and was rolling around on the ground. And she was talking to her girlfriend on the phone while she was filming, and you can hear that she's really, really afraid. I mean, she thought this creature was a demon, and she was so afraid. And her girlfriend came to pick her up, and when her girlfriend pulled up in the front, there was another entity around front that was wearing a hooded cape, and it ran when the headlights hit it. So it's a really compelling case, and there's lots of evidence and lots of witnesses, and so this is what I've been investigating.
Wow. Sounds like you're really going. Have you had a chance to look at the film yourself?
Oh, yeah. And she has the original, and what I have is a copy, and excuse me, my allergies. Anyway.
Mine too. Don't worry about it. This is my time of year.
Yeah, me too, and I'm losing my voice.
So, well, before your voice goes, quick, tell us what did you see? What did it look like?
Well, it was a small creature. They're about 3.5 feet tall, and you can see in the film where it was shooting something out of his eyes, light, and she felt that it was directed at her. That's why she was so afraid, and she doesn't know why it was injured. She did have 3 dogs, and the dogs were on her back porch, and they just weren't moving. But we think that maybe the dogs had attacked it. And so soil samples were taken, and I won't mention by whom or by who or what organization. And the soil samples seem to have disappeared. And there was a lot of confusion as to where a lot of things went involving this case, and it took me quite some time to get all the evidence together that was gotten a number of years back. Excuse me. And the only thing we still don't have are the soil samples, which is really a shame because there was possible DNA on it.
Right.
So,
well, Vivian, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you being with us tonight, and let's give your voice a rest here. Is there anything?
It's okay. It comes and goes.
We've got some callers on the line, so okay. Unless you have something else you need to add, is there anything else?
No, I think that's probably all for now.
Well, I thank you so much for adding to our knowledge about the 1952 flyover over Washington, and join us tonight being the second of eyewitnesses that saw that. And as we've heard, neither one are buying into the story that it was just some sort of natural temperature inversions.
Actually, I do want to add one more.
Okay.
A friend of mine, and I won't say his name because I don't know if he wants to be involved or not. He's a retired lieutenant colonel, and he was a pilot, and he was a teenager and living near the same area and saw the UFOs as well in 1952. So that was another pilot. But he wasn't a pilot at the time, of course, but he knows what he saw too.
Exactly. Vivian, thank you so much for being with us, and good luck to you on your epic voyage.
Thank you.
All righty.
It's a pleasure being here.
We have a caller now from area code 559. Is the caller on the line? Hello.
Hello. How are you this evening? This is Donnie. Can you hear me?
Hey, Donnie. Yes, I'm just lovely.
Oh, good. Well, I'm calling in because I had a sighting, and the sighting that I had, they were colored lights. They were a green colored light. And I've been stuck on this as to why some are lights and some are actual, what appear to be solid objects, UFOs. I'm wondering if your school of thought on this, do they all have the capability of, being under that light, or are the light UFOs and the solid-looking UFOs, are they just totally different?
Well, that's a really good question. And of course, since the government is still denying anything's really going on, and since it's like Vivian just said, when they have some physical evidence, it all too often disappears or gets substituted. So we got a real problem there. But you've asked a good question, and my particular view is that I think there's a series of things, a variety of things that cause this. First off, I've seen some strange lights moving in the night sky, usually way high up there, that would, my first impression would be that I was seeing a satellite go over, except all of a sudden it'll stop or it'll change course. And I go, wait a minute, that's not a satellite. So, and then I think that you have the situation of where, like in the Phoenix lights, where you have an object, and there was a solid object in the air, but it was dark, and you got very bright lights on the underside of it. So even if it comes right over the top of you, basically all you see are the lights, okay? And then I think we also have the possibility that it seems quite evident to me that a lot of these UFOs are utilizing energy fields. And oftentimes these energy fields will give off a light of various colors. And I also agree with those who say that I don't think we're dealing with one brand of UFO here, or one particular species. Back in the 40s and 50s, the big question was, do they come from Mars or do they come from Venus? And then as we got a little bit more knowledgeable and sophisticated in the 60s and 70s, 80s, the question was, well, do they come from Alpha Centauri or do they come from Zeta Reticuli 4? And now today we're even more knowledgeable and more sophisticated, and we're asking, do they come from another dimension? Do they come from another time? And Donnie, frankly, I think the answer is yes, all of the above.
All of the above. Well, here's one. This one puzzles me too. When we see these solid object UFOs, why do they have marker lights on them like standard aircraft do? People will talk about, it had a red light on this end and a white light over here, and they were blinking. Those remind me of aircraft marker lights. They don't want to be hit, so they got these lights on them. That puzzles me. Why would an alien technology spacecraft from another world have beacon markers on it?
Well, maybe they don't want to get hit either.
It seems to me like they would want to play low key,
Yeah, right. But when you know when you know there's all kinds of human craft flying in the skies, you don't want to be up there flying dark. You're liable to, somebody's liable to hit you. But I'm being slightly facetious, but we don't know. Maybe maybe it's an artifact of their propulsion system. Maybe that's their identity markings. I mean, we just don't know. And frankly, I'll also say this. I think that a fairly goodly number of, especially in recent years, of UFO sightings may very well be secret government test craft. So, they may... Go ahead.
When I hear marker lights like that, I turn away from unidentified flying object to man-made flying object kind of thing. Because I can understand man putting lights on them because maybe they don't have the capability of maneuvering quite as quick as some of these things that you said you've seen and other people have seen, where you think you're seeing a satellite and all of a sudden it does a crazy maneuver, right?
Right.
Well, a ship maybe not capable of doing such a maneuver, such as an earthbound ship, man-made, might just put clearance lights on it. I'm not saying they are man-made. I'm just saying that's where my mind goes.
Right. No, I'm seeing that. And, if even if we do, let's say we built a craft that is totally anti-gravity propulsion, you're still going to be stuck with, Air Force regulations, military regulations, FAA regulations, and maybe if they're flying over an inhabited area, they have to put on some sort of marker lights. I don't really know, but I think you've got a good question there. Also, it might be just decoration for all we know. Putting on their Christmas lights to visit the Earth.
Well, maybe they see it as a way of actually trying to communicate with us. Oh, that's the way they do it, so let's do it that way too.
Yeah. And maybe so. Maybe so. And they probably go nuts going over the Super Bowl. What are they saying? What are they saying? I can't make it out. But they're sure signaling. All those lights, they're sure signaling it. Donnie, thank you for the call. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
I see we have Chase on hold. Always glad to talk to Chase. Chase, are you there?
I am. How are you?
Oh, if I was any better, I'd just be delirious.
Great show, by the way. We just love you, Jim. It's like when you go on, all ears are glued.
Well, I tell you what, I try not to babble. I may not make it work too well all the time, but I think we did get some very good information out tonight, and I think it was really extraordinary that we actually had two living witnesses who were actually there and saw the objects that passed over Washington, D.C. in 1952. And as the listeners heard, neither one of these eyewitnesses believes the official story that it was probably temperature inversions. And, of course, I scoffed at that the minute I heard it because, yes, there are such a thing as temperature inversions, and they can cause reflections of lights up in the sky, but you're not going to see them move from one horizon to the other. They're going to be above the lights, right?
Exactly.
What are your thoughts,
I think that's what happens is, the public is getting a little smarter on how some of this works, and, it's like when I was down hunting the Honey Island swamp monster, and we presented them on the show, and, somebody said, oh, well, they're probably seeing swamp gas. And I just laughed at the comment because it's like, these people have, their third, fourth, fifth generation, born, raised, lived, they make their living on that swamp. I bet they know what swamp gas looks like.
I think you're absolutely right, and we're about to run out of time, but mentioning swamp gas, I think swamp gas is what got Gerald Ford made president of the United States. You ready for this?
Yeah, hit it.
Way back there, he is a representative from Michigan. They had a very sensational UFO sighting up there around a girls' college, as I recall. And they sent their scientific people up there, and they held a press conference. They said, we think it was swamp gas. And that so enraged the people, the good people in Michigan, that they just pressured Gerald Ford, their representative, and he announced that he was going to form a committee in Congress, and they were going to seriously investigate UFOs because, something's going on, and it wasn't swamp gas, even if J. Allen Hynek said so. So, but then somebody obviously got to him, and before that committee could be convened, he kind of dropped all of the calls for a UFO committee and kind of went soft on the whole issue. And then, of course, when Richard Nixon began to get into trouble, I'm sure they told him, Jerry, hang in there, we'll take care of you. And when Nixon got in trouble, they appointed Gerald Ford as his vice president after Spiro Agnew was run out of office. And, of course, then when Nixon was run out of office, Gerald Ford became president of the United States. Maybe that's what you can expect if you keep quiet about UFOs. Isn't that interesting?
Absolutely. Hey, Vivian's not on the phone still, is she?
Yeah.
Good.
You are good.
Vivian,
All right, we've only got about 2 minutes to go. Let's go.
I'm jumping, Jim. Hold on for it. Okay, Vivian, when you were describing looking up as a kid at the discs and everything, do you remember how many there were up there?
I think there were about 7.
Oh, jeez. Awesome. 7. And have you heard any accounts from any other of the witnesses, maybe kids that you played with, or, did you guys talk about it at all? I kind of know the answer already, being a military.
No, nobody did because, and I didn't, especially because I thought it was top secret, because of the way my dad acted. And then the people next door, he was Army, and he was a major in the Army, and we were best friends with his kids, but none of us ever talked about it because we just assumed it was top secret. I mean, you grew up in the military, and you're taught, you just don't talk about certain things, and
right.
So you don't ask.
Absolutely, and it's something that you're told all the time, but it is a certain behavior. No matter what you see in this lifestyle, you don't even think about talking about it. It's a way of life. It's how you behave.
Right.
I understand that, but when you told your story earlier, I was very excited to hear about when you said you looked up how many objects. Now, is that what was reported as well? Like that many objects?
I don't know.
Okay.
Okay. Well, hey, let me throw in here. I think the answer to that is that, and this is explanatory. Some of the accounts I read said 9 objects, and others say 8. But then, if you listen to Paul, he said one of them separated, and then now we've got Vivian who said there was about 8.
No, there were. I
7.
Yeah, I thought there were around 7. 7. I mean, I can't be positive because it was so long ago, but in my mind's eye, I think it was about 7. And I remember seeing 2 of them kind of separating off from the cluster. And,
that's right. So
one more than the other.
What I'm suggesting is that there could have been 9 to begin with, and then 2 of them separated off, and there were 7, and then maybe 2 more separated off. Anyway, they seem to be moving around and changing in their formation, which I think
they were moving around.
Yeah, this accounts for the discrepancy, and some of the witnesses saw 7, some saw 8, some saw 9. I think it's perfectly understandable. Well, I think we're out of time, and so we're going to have to call an abrupt end to this really fascinating epic Voyager expedition. And this is your permanent floating, part-time, sometimes occasional fill-in host, Jim Mars, wishing everyone here a really great evening and better tomorrow. And thank you for tuning in, and we'll be doing this again real soon. And thank you, Vivian. Thank you, Chase. Thank you, Donnie. We had some other callers on the line. I'm sorry. Hang in there. Maybe we'll get to you next time. This is Jim Mars saying adios.
Thank you for being with us tonight. Please join us again next Monday evening for Extraordinary Phenomena Investigations Council's Epic Voyages. I'm Roger Peacock for Epic. Until next time.